pornography and making lewd jokes, things like that around her. So I know that kitchens can be one of the most like very kind of day class A places to work. You know, a lot of cussing and a lot of bad jokes and things like that. And a lot of kitchens are that way. That doesn't excuse the behavior, and it doesn't excuse what happened with her. So unfortunately, people don't see it that way. Some people don't see it that way. And I don't really think this should be a white or black issue. It is simply an issue of creating an environment where people, someone felt very uncomfortable working there on a daily basis. So, I mean, it's very clear to me that she should win, in my opinion, from the evidence I've seen, the depositions that I've read. So what that leads me to, though, is, you know, about race, you know, what makes you one race or another? And, you know, race is an interesting subject to me because I'm a race, so I say almost every fucking show because I talk about race so much on my show. So I wanted to read to you quickly, might take about 5 minutes, I guess, to read quickly this article I wrote about race on April 24, 2012. And the article was entitled "The Truth About Race." And the reason I wanted to read this to you is because it pretty much succinctly explains, you know, what I feel about it and kind of makes people understand how race came to be and why we have different races and why there really is no race. And if you are racist, you're a fucking idiot. So this is what it says, and this is what I wrote. I said, so often people are concerned with race in America. It's a volatile subject. One that causes hate crimes, murders, hatred, bigotry, prejudice, discrimination, and many other horrible consequences. To be concerned with race does not necessarily make one a racist per se. However, a person's mere preoccupation with race, whether Caucasian, African American, Asian, Hispanic, or otherwise, can be a sign of latent, if not overt, racism. The races have always been seen as different from one another. African Americans typically have darker skin than Caucasians. Caucasians typically have lighter eyes than Asians. Asians typically have shorter statures than most Hispanic people, and there are differences between races. For one to say that the differences do not exist is simply untrue. However, the question is, how different are we? Are we really all that different, or are our differences simply superficial and minute? As for race, quote-unquote race, does it even exist outside of your own perception? The fact is that we are all one race, the human race, Homo sapiens. The idea of race in humanity has been created by us, not by genetics or evolution. When we see someone who looks like we do, we feel safe. When we see someone who looks different than we do, we may feel unsafe. These feelings are not necessarily innate, but are kind of learned, are merely learned most of the time. Upon birth, we are essentially a clean slate, and we are malleable and can be shaped into whatever our environment and our genetics sometimes dictate. Racism is a learned way of thinking. Creationists, by the way, whom often also believe that the races were created and not meant to mix as according to the Bible, often frown on the idea of evolution. It's not as if evolution is questionable for plant species or animals or any other organism to anyone who actually accepts science as reality. For example, most creationists will accept that the sky is blue and the grass is green. They also accept that the sky is blue because of the combination of oxygen, nitrogen, and Rayleigh scattering in the atmosphere, or that grass is green due to chlorophyll. They may accept that when you drop something, it falls to the ground due to gravity, or that when ice melts, its molecular makeup alters and becomes water. However, when confronted with the exact same science that dictates physics and chemistry, they may accept, in regards to evolution, they deny the science. They instead choose to believe in a book written over 2,000 years ago, when the writer still believed in a flat Earth and did not even know that the existence of the Americas. The same adamant belief that the races were created and human beings created as they exist today and walked alongside dinosaurs is one of the catalysts for racism today in America. For if they understood and accepted the science behind the evolution of the races, they would understand that races are indeed only 0.001% genetically different. That difference accounts only for superficial visible differences such as skin color, hair type, eye color, height, bone density, etc. So where did that 0.001% difference evolve and why? It all started in Africa about 150 to 200,000 years ago. Bands of humans began migrating out of Africa only about 70,000 years ago. As we spread across the globe, populations continually bumped into one another and mixed their mates and genes. Africans have darker skin because they have more melanin in their skin. The closer people were to the equator, the darker their skin is to protect them from the sun. Europeans developed different hair, to contend with a wet environment and lighter eye color due to living in caves in the colder climates for centuries before the ice melted and created a lush landscape around them that they came out to. Asians developed their eye folds and their cheekbones to protect them from the harsh climates and reflection of the sun on the snow from where they originated. They migrated to present-day Japan, China, Mongolia, etc., only 2,000 years ago, and so they retain this characteristic. Almost done. According to the Genographic Project, a nonprofit research group which has traced back close to 500,000 participants' DNA to the same two African ancestors, the proof is in the science. Many volunteers are finding results that they never expected. Many African Americans finding that their ancestors trace back to Europe, while many Europeans are finding their lineage traces back to Africa, yet all of the participants trace their initial ancestor back to Africa. The science behind this is sound and has been published in a lot of respected scientific journals. So, if we accept science as being proof of something, and science has proven that we all originated from the same place, then that means race only exists in each of our perceptions. And I am living proof of this. Although my mother is of German descent and my father is African descent, I was born with blonde hair and blue eyes and very pale skin. As a matter of fact, both sides of my family thought I wasn't my father's child, that it wasn't possible that I could be his child. They stuck to their beliefs until I got older and saw that I was indeed my father's son. As I got older, my eyes turned hazel green, my hair medium brown, and my skin olive. Even with these changes, as I went through my teen years and 20s and now, I am almost always perceived as something other than what I am, typically Hispanic or Middle Eastern. So people come up to me speaking Spanish. I have no idea half the time what they're saying, or people will assume I'm Middle Eastern and will look at me suspiciously as I board a plane. Even though my family has been American before there was an America since 1704 in Virginia. These perceptions are incorrect and are an illusion because the reality is that I am half white and I am half black, no matter what I look like. But my reality is altered because of how others perceive my race in their own minds. Race only exists in our perception. It does not exist otherwise, and we all are all exactly the same and come from the same place, but with different shells. That is not to say that cultural differences do not exist. They do. People often conflate culture with race, and in reality, they can and often are disparate. An African American who grows up in the culture of a predominantly African American neighborhood and is probably surrounded by other African Americans and does not go to college will identify much differently with their quote-unquote race than an African American who grows up in the culture of Beverly Hills in a mansion with predominantly Caucasian acquaintances and friends that goes to Harvard. One is not inherently necessarily better than the other, but they are undoubtedly different. It's only one example of how culture affects the perception people carry about race, when in reality, it's really culture that people are often looking at. Two more sentences. To discriminate against others because of race is as ridiculous as discriminating against your own sibling or parent because they have a different hair color than you do. Race exists only in our minds and perception of other people. If it's in our minds, then that means it's not this thing that is beyond people's control. It's simply about changing how we see the world, our perception. It's really very simple. Don't see race when you meet someone. See them for who they are otherwise. At least then you'll be a victim of the illusion of race, and you finally can say with a certainty that you are indeed not a racist. And if you are a racist, hating people for something that doesn't even really exist, then you're an idiot. So that was the article I wrote on April 24th, 2012. It's called The Truth About Race. So that pretty much describes everything I needed to say about that particular topic, but I wanted to make sure that I gave people a chance to respond to anything they wanted to say. If you want to call in, the number is 323-843-6160. I think, though, that it is true when you have a discussion about race, people get upset. And a lot of white people, for example, don't understand why people of a minority why they get so upset when people are attacking them racially. And I think it's because, obviously we know, because a white person doesn't really know discrimination the way a black person, a Hispanic person, an Asian person, a gay person, or a woman sometimes, even just a woman of any kind, may experience in this world. And so a person, meaning a white Anglo-Saxon heterosexual Protestant male, is not going to know what it means to be discriminated against, at least not yet. I'm thinking that things are going to change, and well, I'm not thinking, I know. In 2025, the United States will no longer be a predominantly Caucasian culture or country. It will be predominantly mixed races and minorities. So we will no longer be a country that is quote unquote ruled by one particular race. It will be really the melting pot it was intended to be initially. And so I find, or I think really honestly, truthfully, that the racism that's been experienced in this country by minorities since the beginning of it, before its inception, by the Native Americans, by blacks and slavery and that nature, and everyone, and now really Mexicans coming over from the border, will begin to turn the tables on white people in the future. And I'm not saying it's going to be this huge uproar. I'm just saying that I think white people are afraid of this happening. Well, I don't think it. I know a lot of white people are. And I think it's something that's visceral and deeply ingrained in them to have felt entitled to this country for so long, because they have ruled this country for so long, in terms of race anyway, and been at the top of the heap. But all the presidents have all been white except our current one, and so, which is just another indication of the tide turning in terms of running this country someday. So I understand how that can be fearful for a particular group of people in any kind of situation, and especially when you've been in power for so long. And one particular, if I were a king or something, or a CEO of a major corporation, and I got ousted, I know how I would feel. I would feel, wow, I lost all my power. Now what's going to happen to me? I feel vulnerable now. So that's what is happening with race today in this country. People are feeling vulnerable, and it's understandable, and they have a right to feel vulnerable. But that's how the minorities have felt for 300 years in this country. So now people on the other side of the aisle will begin to understand what it feels like. And so that is and people are afraid of death. And like, I know, what's his name? Not Jewish producer, but what's his name? Jewish producer, what's the guy's name? Mr. Midnight Movie, sorry. Mr. Midnight Movie is always talking on his show about white guilt and all this stuff, whatever. And when I first started listening to his show, a year or so ago, I didn't really listen closely to what he was saying sometimes. I took it at face value, which is shame on me. I should have listened deeper, right? And so I did. And I still find him to be wrong about things, don't get me wrong. I find him to be very wrong. But he's always saying no white guilt, no white guilt, white guilt. Well, yeah, you as a Caucasian person, if you're a white person out there, I don't think you should have guilt over being white. I think you should be proud to be who you are. Be white, be proud of it, be happy about it, whatever. Just as a black person should be happy about it, just as an Hispanic person. Everybody should be happy to be what they are. But to say that one race is at a disadvantage because of another only because they're no longer necessarily going to be in control of everything, or they're losing control or losing power, I think that's what, when I hear Mr. Midnight Movie speak, that's how I feel. That's what I feel he's feeling inside is fear. And so fear, unfortunately, usually leads to a lot of bad things. And so we have a lot of people in this country who are very fearful of something or anything that's different than they are, whether they're gay or different races or whatever. Ku Klux Klan people or the Aryan, whatever the fuck they're called, I don't know what the fuck they're called. So, there's always somebody that's got an issue with somebody else. But that's not up to you to solve. And so if people want to feel threatened by another race simply because they're doing well and becoming more on keel with the other races, then that's their own issue. It's not the issue of the race that's doing better than they once were. And look at it this perspective also. Do you really feel like, if we take African Americans, for example, that African Americans, that they really had an equal shot in this country from the very beginning? No. It's obviously, anybody who argues against that is an idiot. Obviously, African Americans did not have an equal shot or equal starting point in this country. And the way I look at it is this. If you are starting a race, right? Let's say you're starting a track race, or like a 1 mile race, or whatever the fuck it's called. I don't know. What's it called when you go around the track? You start at the hurdles or whatever. I don't know. And you go to the other end, and one of them you have to get there first, whatever that's called, because I'm gay, I don't know a lot of sports. Anyway, so whatever that's called, let's say you start at the starting line at the same place, and you both have equal opportunity to reach the end point, right, the finish line, at the same way, because you both have the same opportunity. But if you look at it this way, black people in this country started out way behind. The white people got a really long start. They got a 250 year start above in front of the black people.